Dr. Sarah Chen had always believed that medicine existed above politics, above rules, above everything except the sacred duty to save lives. Standing in the fluorescent-lit emergency room of San Diego General Hospital at 2:47 a.m., blood still fresh on her scrubs from the previous patient, she watched as the automatic doors burst open with a violence that made everyone in the trauma bay freeze. The man who stumbled through those doors wasn't walking so much as falling forward with purpose. His face was a canvas of bruises painted in purple and black, one eye swollen completely shut, the other wild with pain and determination. But it wasn't his battered face that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It was the way he moved, the way he held his left arm against his body, and the unmistakable bearing of someone who had seen combat. "I need help," the man said, his voice barely above a whisper but carrying the kind of authority that made people listen. Blood dripped steadily from a gash above his right eyebrow, leaving a trail of crimson dots on the white hospital floor. Sarah moved toward him instinctively, her medical training overriding everything else. As she got closer, she could see the full extent of his injuries. His left shoulder hung at an unnatural angle, clearly dislocated. Cuts covered his arms and face, some deep enough to need stitches. His breathing was labored, suggesting possible rib damage. "What happened to you?" Sarah asked, gently guiding him toward an empty bed in the trauma bay. Her hands were already moving, checking his pulse, examining his pupils for signs of concussion. The man hesitated for a moment, and, in that pause, Sarah noticed something that made her heart sink. Pinned to his torn jacket, barely visible beneath the blood and dirt, was a small military insignia. A trident. The symbol of a Navy SEAL. "Training accident," he said finally, but Sarah had been a trauma doctor long enough to know the difference between training injuries and something else entirely. The pattern of bruising on his face, the defensive wounds on his forearms, the way he kept looking over his shoulder toward the entrance, this wasn't training. This was assault. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, beginning to cut away his jacket to better assess his injuries. "Marcus Webb," he replied, wincing as she moved his arm. "Listen, Doc, I just need you to patch me up quick. I can't be here long." Sarah paused in her examination. "Mr. Webb, these injuries are serious. You need X-rays, possibly surgery for that shoulder. I can't just patch you up." Marcus tried to sit up, his good eye meeting hers with an intensity that was both pleading and desperate. "You don't understand. I can't go through official channels. I can't have any record of being here." That's when Sarah understood. She had heard rumors, whispers in medical circles about what happened to military personnel who reported certain kinds of incidents. How they could find themselves suddenly transferred, their careers ended, their lives destroyed. How the system that was supposed to protect them often turned against them instead. "Tell me what really happened," Sarah said quietly, positioning herself between Marcus and the rest of the emergency room staff. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he were trying to decide whether to trust her. Finally, he spoke. "I witnessed something I shouldn't have. Reported it up the chain of command like I was supposed to. 3 hours later, my commanding officer and 2 other guys cornered me in the parking lot outside the base. Told me I was confused about what I saw. Told me to forget about it. And, when you didn't forget?" Marcus gestured to his battered face. "This is what happens when you don't forget." Sarah felt a familiar anger rising in her chest. It was the same feeling she got when she saw domestic violence victims who were too scared to press charges, or when insurance companies denied necessary treatments. The feeling of watching the system fail the very people it was supposed to protect. "I'm going to help you," she said firmly. "But, we need to do this right. Full examination, proper treatment, documentation of your injuries." "Doc, no. No documentation. If there's a record of me being here, there won't be," Sarah interrupted. "Not in the way you're thinking. Trust me." Over the next 2 hours, Sarah worked on Marcus with the kind of focused intensity that had made her one of the best trauma surgeons on the West Coast. She reset his dislocated shoulder, stitched the deeper cuts, and wrapped his ribs. But, more importantly, she documented everything. Every bruise, every cut, every injury that told the story of what had really happened to him. She used her personal camera to take photographs, carefully noting the patterns of injury that were consistent with assault rather than accident. She wrote detailed notes in her own personal file, separate from the hospital records. She was building a case, piece by piece, knowing that someday Marcus might need proof of what had been done to him. As she worked, Marcus told her more of his story. About the corruption he had witnessed, about how military contracts were being manipulated, about how soldiers were dying because of equipment that wasn't up to standard while someone higher up the chain was getting rich. He spoke in quiet, measured tones, but Sarah could hear the pain beneath his words. Not just physical pain, but the deeper hurt of betrayal by the institution he had devoted his life to serving. "Why are you doing this?" Marcus asked as Sarah finished bandaging his last wound. "You could get in trouble for not following protocol." Sarah looked at him steadily. "Because sometimes doing the right thing matters more than following rules." It was 5:30 a.m. when Marcus finally stood to leave. The sun was beginning to rise outside the windows of the emergency room, painting everything in soft orange light. He moved better now, the pain medication Sarah had given him taking the edge off his injuries. "What are you going to do now?" Sarah asked. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "I don't know. I can't go back to base. Can't go home, they know where I live. Maybe I'll find a lawyer, try to take this official." "You should," Sarah said. "And, when you do, you call me. I'll testify to what I've seen tonight." Marcus nodded, but Sarah could see in his eyes that he didn't really believe it would matter. Too many people had failed him already. Too many systems had let him down. As he walked toward the exit, Sarah felt a strange sense of foreboding. Something in the way Marcus had looked over his shoulder, something in the tension he carried even after treatment, told her that this wasn't over. That whatever he had witnessed, whatever he had reported, was bigger than either of them realized. She was right to be worried. At exactly 6:15 a.m., 30 minutes after Marcus had left the hospital, two men in dark suits walked into the emergency room. They moved with the kind of purposeful stride that immediately caught attention, their eyes scanning the room with professional thoroughness. "We need to speak with whoever treated a patient named Marcus Webb," the taller one said, flashing credentials too quickly for anyone to read properly. Sarah felt her stomach drop. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Federal investigators," the man replied. "Mr. Webb is a person of interest in an ongoing investigation. We need to see all medical records related to his treatment tonight." Sarah straightened her spine, drawing on every ounce of authority her position afforded her. "I'm afraid that's impossible without proper warrants." "Patient confidentiality laws," Dr. Chen, the second man interrupted, and the fact that he knew her name made her blood run cold. "We're not asking for your cooperation. We're requiring it." That's when Sarah realized just how deep this went. These weren't random investigators. They had known exactly where to come, exactly who to ask for. Someone had been watching Marcus, had followed him to the hospital, had waited just long enough for him to leave before moving in. "I need to see proper identification and warrants," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear growing in her chest. The first man smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Dr. Chen, you seem to be under the impression that you have a choice in this matter." Sarah looked around the emergency room, hoping to catch the eye of someone else on staff, someone who could witness what was happening. But the morning shift was just beginning, and the few people present were busy with other patients. "The patient you're asking about was treated and released," she said carefully. "Standard emergency room protocol. We need those records, doctor. Then, you need to go through proper legal channels." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Sarah could feel her heart pounding, but she refused to back down. She had made a promise to Marcus, and, more than that, she had taken an oath to do no harm. Turning over records to people who clearly intended to use them against her patient would be a violation of everything she believed in. That's when her supervisor, Dr. James Harrison, walked into the emergency room. Sarah had worked under Harrison for 3 years, and she had always respected his judgment. But, as soon as he saw the two men in suits, his expression changed. not to surprise or confusion, but to something that looked almost like resignation. "Dr. Chen," Harrison said quietly, "these gentlemen are here on official business. Please provide them with whatever they need." Sarah stared at her supervisor in disbelief. "Jim, you can't be serious. Patient confidentiality laws exist for a reason." Harrison wouldn't meet her eyes. "Sometimes there are larger considerations, Sarah. National security concerns that override normal protocols." "National security?" Sarah's voice rose slightly. "We're talking about treating an injured soldier, not harboring terrorists." "Dr. Chen," the first man in the suit said, his tone now carrying a clear threat, "we can do this the easy way or the hard way. Your choice." Sarah looked from the men in suits to her supervisor, realizing with growing horror that she was completely alone in this. Whatever forces were aligned against Marcus Webb were powerful enough to reach into her hospital, to pressure her supervisor, to make people abandon their principles out of fear. But a fear, Sarah had learned during her years as a trauma surgeon, was not a reason to abandon your patients. "I'm sorry," she said firmly. "But I cannot and will not provide patient information without proper legal authority. If you want those records, get a warrant." The silence that followed was deafening. The two men exchanged a look that Sarah couldn't interpret, but she could feel the weight of whatever decision they were making. Finally, the taller man spoke. "Dr. Chen, you're making a serious mistake." "Maybe," Sarah replied. "But it's my mistake to make. What happened next would change everything." As Sarah watched, Dr. Harrison stepped forward, his face pale but determined. "Sarah," he said quietly, "you're suspended. Effective immediately. Security will escort you out." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. In all her years of medicine, through all the difficult cases and challenging situations, she had never imagined being suspended for trying to protect a patient. "On what grounds?" she demanded. "Insubordination," Harrison replied, still not meeting her eyes. "Failure to cooperate with official investigations." Sarah felt the world tilting around her. Everything she had worked for, everything she had built in her career, was crumbling because she had chosen to stand up for what was right. As security guards appeared to escort her out, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the emergency room windows. She looked tired, defeated, older than her 38 years. But underneath the exhaustion, she could see something else. A determination that surprised even her. They could take her job. They could threaten her. But they couldn't make her betray her principles. As Sarah was let out of the hospital she had called home for 3 years, she had no way of knowing that her decision to protect Marcus Webb had set in motion a chain of events that would reach the highest levels of government. She had no way of knowing that Marcus had information that could bring down a conspiracy involving millions of dollars in military contracts and the deaths of American soldiers. She had no way of knowing that in less than 24 hours, a Navy helicopter would land on the roof of the very hospital that had just fired her, carrying people who would change everything she thought she knew about the case she had stumbled into. All she knew, as she walked out into the morning sunlight with her career in ruins, was that she had done the right thing. And, sometimes, that had to be enough. 26 hours after being escorted out of San Diego General Hospital, Dr. Sarah Chen sat in her small apartment overlooking the bay, staring at her laptop screen with growing disbelief. The news article she was reading made her stomach turn cold with recognition and fear. "Navy SEAL found dead in apparent suicide," the headline read. Below it was a photograph of Marcus Webb, the same man she had treated less than 2 days ago. The same man whose injury she had carefully documented, whose story of assault and corruption she had believed without question. According to the article, Marcus had been found in his car in a remote area outside the city, dead from a single gunshot wound to the head. The report mentioned his recent struggles with depression, his difficulty adjusting to civilian life, the pressure of military service. All standard language for what the military liked to call adjustment disorders. Sarah knew better. She had seen Marcus's eyes, had heard the determination in his voice when he talked about exposing the corruption he had witnessed. This wasn't a man planning suicide. This was a man planning to fight. Her phone rang, startling her out of her thoughts. The number was unknown, but something made her answer.
Dr. Chen?
The voice was female, professional, with a slight accent she couldn't place.
Yes? My name is Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres. I'm with Naval Criminal Investigative Service. I need to meet with you about Marcus Webb. Sarah's grip tightened on the phone. I don't know what you're talking about.
Doctor, I know you treated Mr. Webb 2 nights ago.
I know you documented his injuries.
And I know those injuries didn't come from a training accident.
How do you?
Because I've been investigating the same corruption that got Marcus killed, Torres interrupted.
And, right now, you might be the only person who can help me prove it.
Sarah was quiet for a long moment, her mind racing. After what had happened at the hospital, after being suspended for trying to do the right thing, she wasn't sure who to trust.
Dr. Chen? Are you there? Why should I believe you? Sarah asked finally.
Because if I was part of the cover-up, you'd already be dead. The blunt honesty of the statement was somehow reassuring. Sarah made a decision that would change her life forever.
Where do you want to meet? An hour later, Sarah sat across from Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres in a small cafe near the harbor.
Torres was younger than Sarah had expected, probably in her early 30s, with short dark hair and intelligent brown eyes that seemed to miss nothing. She wore civilian clothes, but there was something about her posture that marked her as military. Before we start, Torres said, sliding a folder across the table, you need to know what you're getting into. What Marcus stumbled across isn't just corruption.
It's treason. Sarah opened the folder and felt her breath catch.
Inside were photographs of military equipment, technical specifications, and financial documents. But what made her hands tremble was a photograph of Marcus Webb, clearly taken before his death, sitting across from another man at what looked like a restaurant.
This was taken 3 days ago, Torres explained.
6 hours before Marcus was assaulted. The man he's talking to is Richard Vasquez, a defense contractor with connections to 3 separate companies that have been overcharging the military for substandard equipment.
Substandard how? Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect she didn't want to know the answer.
Body armor that fails under battlefield conditions.
Communication equipment that cuts out during critical operations.
Medical supplies that are expired or contaminated before they reach combat zones.
Sarah felt sick. How many soldiers have died because of this? We don't know for sure.
But our conservative estimate is at least 47 deaths in the last 18 months that can be directly attributed to equipment failures.
The weight of that number settled on Sarah like a physical force. 47 families destroyed. 47 futures cut short. Also, someone could make a profit.
What did Marcus know specifically? She asked.
Torres pulled out another document.
Marcus was part of a unit that tested new equipment before it was deployed. He discovered that test results were being falsified. Equipment that failed basic safety standards was being approved for use by American soldiers. When he tried to report it through official channels, he was told to keep quiet.
And, when he wouldn't?
They tried to destroy him.
First character assassination, rumors about his mental health, his reliability. When that didn't work, they moved to physical intimidation.
Sarah thought about Marcus's injuries, the careful pattern of bruises that told a story of systematic violence.
The assault I treated wasn't random. No. It was a message. Stay quiet or things will get worse. But he didn't stay quiet. Torres shook her head. Marcus contacted me 3 days ago. Said he had proof of what was happening. Documentation, recorded conversations, financial records. He was supposed to turn everything over to me yesterday. What happened? Someone got to him first. Sarah stared at the photographs in the folder, trying to process everything she was hearing.
You're saying Marcus Webb was murdered. I'm saying Marcus Webb knew too much, and now he's dead. And the official story is that he killed himself.
What about the evidence he said he had? Gone.
His apartment was cleaned out. His car was wiped clean except for the gun they say he used.
His computer hard drive was corrupted. Very convenient.
Sarah closed the folder, her mind reeling.
Why are you telling me this?
Torres leaned forward, her expression intense.
Because you have something they don't know about. You documented his injuries. You took photographs. You have proof that Marcus Webb was assaulted, which contradicts the story they're trying to sell. The hospital confiscated my documentation.
The men in suits, no, they didn't.
Torres smiled slightly. You're smarter than they gave you credit for. You made copies before they showed up, didn't you? Sarah's silence was answer enough. I thought so. A good doctor always keeps backups. Even if I did have copies, Sarah said carefully, what good would they do? Marcus is dead. Because this is bigger than Marcus Webb.
The corruption he uncovered involves dozens of contracts, multiple companies, and reaches all the way up to Pentagon procurement offices. If we can prove that Marcus was murdered to keep him quiet, it opens the door to investigating everything else. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the harbor where Navy ships sat at anchor.
What exactly are you asking me to do? I'm asking you to turn over your documentation of Marcus's injuries. I'm asking you to testify about what he told you. And I'm asking you to help me catch the people who killed him. You're asking me to risk my life. Torres didn't sugarcoat it. Yes. I am. And if I say no? Then Marcus Webb dies for nothing. 47 dead soldiers stay unavenged. And American troops keep dying because they're being sent into battle with equipment designed to fail. Sarah thought about Marcus, about the determination in his eyes when he talked about doing the right thing.
She thought about her oath as a doctor, her responsibility to protect life. She thought about the 47 families who would never know that their loved ones had died not for their country, but for someone else's profit.
What do you need from me? Torres pulled out a secure phone. First, I need you to upload your documentation to a secure server.
Then, I need you to help me understand exactly what Marcus's physical condition told you about what happened to him.
Over the next 3 hours, Sarah walked Torres through every detail of Marcus's injuries.
The pattern of bruising that indicated he had been held down.
The defensive wounds that showed he had fought back. The specific types of trauma that were consistent with interrogation techniques rather than random assault. This is good, Torres said, reviewing the uploaded files. This is very good. But we need more. What kind of more? We need to find the people who did this to Marcus. And we need to prove they were acting on orders from higher up. How do we do that? Torres showed Sarah another photograph.
This man is Staff Sergeant David Chen, no relation to you, I assume. He was one of the 3 men who assaulted Marcus.
Military police report from that night shows he was treated for injuries consistent with being in a fight. Sarah studied the photograph.
The man was large, muscular, with the kind of build that suggested he spent serious time in the gym. His face was hard, with small eyes and a scar running from his left ear to his jaw.
Where is he now? That's the problem.
Chen disappeared the same day Marcus was found dead. Along with the other 2 men who were involved in the assault.
Disappeared how? Transferred to classified assignments.
Deep black operations where their locations and activities are above my clearance level. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine.
Someone is cleaning house. Exactly. Which means we need to move fast before more evidence disappears. Torres pulled out yet another document. There's something else. The gun they say Marcus used to kill himself? It was registered to David Chen. You're kidding. I wish I were. Either Chen is incredibly stupid, or someone wanted us to find this connection. Which do you think it is? I think someone is sending us a message.
The same way Marcus's assault was a message. Sarah leaned back in her chair, overwhelmed by the scope of what they were dealing with.
This goes all the way to the top, doesn't it? Higher than you can imagine. The defense contracts involved are worth over $2 billion. The people benefiting from this have the kind of money and influence that can make problems disappear permanently. Including us. Including us.
Sarah stared at her reflection in the cafe window, seeing a woman who looked older and more tired than she remembered. 24 hours ago, her biggest concern had been losing her job for protecting a patient. Now she was contemplating taking on a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of government and military command. "What's our next step?" she asked. Torres smiled, and, for the first time since they had started talking, Sarah saw something that looked like hope in the other woman's eyes. "Now we do something they won't expect. We go public." "What do you mean?" "I mean, we take everything we have, your documentation, my investigation files, the evidence of Marcus's murder, and we give it to someone who can't be bought or intimidated."
"Who?" "Senator Elizabeth Warren has been investigating defense contractor fraud for years. She has a reputation for not backing down from powerful interests.
If we can get this information to her, she can force a congressional investigation." Sarah felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in days: hope.
"You think she'll listen?"
"I think she'll be very interested in a story about American soldiers dying because someone was more interested in profit than protection." Torres gathered up the documents and photographs, sliding them back into her folder. "But, first, we need to get more evidence.
And that means taking some risks."
"What kind of risks?"
"The kind where we have to trust each other completely.
Because if one of us gets caught, they'll use whatever they find to destroy both of us." Sarah looked at Torres, this woman she had met only 3 hours ago, who was asking her to risk everything on the strength of a conviction that the truth mattered more than safety.
"Okay," Sarah said. "I'm in."
Torres nodded.
"Good. Because tomorrow we're going to break into David Chen's apartment." "We're going to what?"
"Chen disappeared, but his apartment is still rented. His personal effects are still there. If we can find anything that connects him to his superiors, anything that shows he was acting on orders, we'll have the link we need."
"That's breaking and entering."
"Yes, it is. I could lose my medical license."
"You could lose a lot more than that if we don't stop these people."
Sarah thought about Marcus Webb, about his certainty that someone needed to speak for the soldiers who couldn't speak for themselves. She thought about the 47 families who deserved justice for their losses.
"When do we go?" "Tomorrow night. Chen's building has minimal security, and I've been watching his patterns. He's definitely not coming back."
"How can you be sure?"
Torres's expression darkened.
"Because David Chen was found dead this morning in a hotel room in Phoenix.
Apparent drug overdose."
Sarah felt the blood drain from her face.
"They're killing their own people. They're tying up loose ends. Which means we're running out of time."
As they prepared to leave the cafe, Torres grabbed Sarah's arm.
"Dr. Chen, you need to understand something. After tomorrow night, there's no going back. Once we have whatever's in Chen's apartment, we'll know enough to bring down this entire operation. But they'll also know that we know." "Meaning?"
"Meaning they'll do whatever it takes to stop us. Including what they did to Marcus and Chen." Sarah looked out at the harbor one more time, watching the ships that carried young men and women off to war with equipment that might fail them when they needed it most. "Then, we better make sure we get it right the first time." What Sarah didn't know, as she walked back to her car that evening, was that their conversation had been observed. A man in a dark sedan had been taking photographs through the cafe window, documenting their meeting, recording their expressions. What she didn't know was that forces far more powerful than she could imagine were already moving to stop them. What she didn't know was that in less than 18 hours, everything would change again, and the stakes would become higher than either she or Torres could have possibly anticipated. The apartment building where David Chen had lived was a nondescript concrete structure in a neighborhood that had seen better days. Standing in the shadows across the street at 11:30 p.m., Dr. Sarah Chen watched Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres pick the lock on the building's back entrance with professional efficiency. "Where did you learn to do that?" Sarah whispered. "Naval intelligence training includes a lot of skills they don't put on the official curriculum," Torres replied, her voice barely audible.
Stay close and don't touch anything unless I tell you to.
The hallway inside smelled of old carpet and broken dreams. They climbed 3 flights of stairs in darkness, Torres leading the way with a small red-filtered flashlight that cast everything in an eerie crimson glow. Chen's apartment was 3B, a corner unit at the end of the hall. Torres made quick work of the apartment lock as well, and they slipped inside. The space was spartanly furnished, a couch, a television, a small dining table, and not much else. It had the impersonal feel of a place where someone slept but didn't really live.
What exactly are we looking for? Sarah asked, pulling on the latex gloves Torres had given her. Anything that connects Chen to his superiors. Orders, communications, payments. Something that proves he was acting under direction rather than on his own.
They worked systematically through the apartment. Torres took the bedroom while Sarah searched the living area. It was slow, careful work. They couldn't risk leaving any evidence of their presence, which meant putting everything back exactly as they found it. Sarah was going through a stack of mail on the dining table when she noticed something odd.
Most of the bills and correspondence were addressed to David Chen at this address.
But one envelope, near the bottom of the stack, was addressed to D. Mitchell at the same apartment number.
Torres, she called quietly. I think I found something.
Torres emerged from the bedroom.
What is it? David Chen might not be his real name. Sarah showed her the envelope.
Or at least, he was using aliases.
Torres examined the mail piece, a bank statement for A. D. Mitchell. This could be significant.
If he was operating under false identities, it suggests a higher level of operational security than you'd expect from a rogue sergeant.
Meaning someone was funding him professionally. Exactly.
Torres photographed the envelope with her phone, then continued searching. In the bedroom closet, behind a row of military uniforms, she found what they were really looking for.
Sarah, get in here.
Hidden behind the uniforms was a small safe, the kind typically used for important documents. It was standing open, its contents scattered on the floor as if someone had rifled through it hastily.
Someone beat us here, Torres said, kneeling beside the scattered papers. Recently? Very recently.
Some of these documents are still warm from body heat. Sarah felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air.
Are we in danger? We need to move fast. Torres began photographing the scattered documents. But we're here now, so let's see what they left behind.
Most of the papers were financial records, bank statements showing regular deposits of large amounts of money, far more than a staff sergeant's salary would account for. But, near the bottom of the pile, Sarah found something that made her blood run cold. It was a photograph of her own apartment building.
Torres. I see it. Torres's voice was grim. Keep looking.
If they have photos of your place, there might be more surveillance material. They found it in a manila folder that had been torn open and partially emptied.
Photographs of Sarah leaving the hospital after her suspension. Photos of her meeting with Torres at the cafe.
Even photos of her inside her own apartment, taken with a telephoto lens through her windows.
They've been watching me since the night I treated Marcus, Sarah realized.
Which means they know about our investigation.
Torres gathered up the surveillance photos. We need to leave. Now. That's when they heard the elevator.
The old building's elevator was loud and mechanical, and its operation at nearly midnight was not likely to be coincidental.
Torres grabbed Sarah's arm. Is there another way out of here? Sarah thought about the building's layout. Fire escape. End of the hall.
They moved quickly but quietly toward the apartment door.
Torres opened it just a crack, peering into the hallway. The elevator was still ascending, its floor indicator showing it was passing the second floor.
Go, Torres whispered.
Fire escape. I'll meet you at the bottom. What are you doing? Making sure we weren't followed.
Sarah wanted to argue, but the elevator bell chimed as it reached the third floor. She ran down the hallway toward the fire escape as quietly as she could manage. The fire escape was old and rusty, protesting loudly as Sarah climbed down toward the alley below. Behind her, she could hear voices in the hallway, male voices, speaking in urgent tones that didn't sound friendly. She was halfway down when Torres appeared at the fire escape window above her. "Move!" Torres called out, her professional calm finally cracking. "They have guns." Sarah half climbed, half fell down the rest of the fire escape as the sound of an apartment door being kicked in echoed through the night. She hit the alley pavement hard, scraping her hands on the rough asphalt. Torres landed beside her seconds later, and they ran toward the street where Sarah had parked her car. Behind them, lights were coming on in apartment windows as residents woke to the sound of the disturbance above. They were 50 feet from Sarah's car when the men emerged from the building's front entrance. Sarah caught a glimpse of dark clothing and the unmistakable outline of weapons before Torres grabbed her and pulled her between two parked cars. "Stay down," Torres whispered. "Don't move until I tell you." The men spread out, searching the street with professional efficiency. Sarah counted at least 4 of them, all moving with military precision. These weren't random criminals or even regular police. These were operators, the kind of people who made problems disappear permanently. One of them was speaking into a radio or phone. "Target building is clear. No sign of subjects. Expanding search pattern." Torres waited until the men had moved further down the street before signaling to Sarah. They crept between parked cars until they reached Sarah's vehicle. "Keys," Torres whispered. Sarah fumbled in her pocket, her hands shaking from adrenaline. Torres took the keys and started the car while staying below window level. "When I say go, you're going to slide over to the passenger seat and get as low as possible," Torres said. "I'm going to drive us out of here, and it's not going to be gentle." "Okay. Go." Sarah slid across the seats as Torres gunned the engine and pulled away from the curb without turning on the headlights. In the rearview mirror, Sarah could see the dark figures running toward them, but Torres was already turning the corner, using her knowledge of military driving techniques to lose their pursuers in the maze of residential streets. They drove in silence for 20 minutes, Torres taking random turns and doubling back on their route to ensure they weren't being followed. Finally, she pulled into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner near the freeway. "Are you okay?" Torres asked. Sarah examined her scraped hands and considered the question. "Physically, yes. Emotionally, I feel like I'm living in a spy movie. Unfortunately, this isn't fiction." Torres showed her the photographs she had taken in Chen's apartment. "But we got what we came for." The bank statements told a clear story. David Chen had been receiving regular payments of $10,000 per month from an account registered to something called Pacific Defense Solutions. The payments had been going on for over a year, well before the incident with Marcus Webb. "This proves Chen was on someone's payroll," Sarah said, studying the documents on Torres's phone. "More than that. Pacific Defense Solutions is one of the companies Marcus was investigating. The one that's been providing substandard body armor." Sarah felt pieces of the puzzle clicking into place. So Chen wasn't just muscle hired for intimidation. He was a long-term asset, placed inside the military to protect the company's interests. And to eliminate threats to those interests. Like Marcus. Like Marcus. And, now like us. Sarah looked around the diner parking lot, suddenly, feeling exposed despite the bright lights and late-night traffic. "What do we do now?" "We take this evidence to Senator Warren like we planned. But, first, we need to get you somewhere safe." "What do you mean?" "Those men weren't just searching Chen's apartment. They were looking for us specifically. They know who we are, where you live, probably where you work. You can't go home." Sarah felt the reality of her situation sinking in. In the space of 3 days, she had gone from being a respected emergency room doctor to being a fugitive from forces she didn't fully understand. "Where can I go?" Torres was quiet for a moment, clearly thinking through options. "I have a safe house. It's not official, NCIS doesn't know about it. But it's secure." "How do you have an unofficial safe house?" "Because sometimes official channels can't be trusted. This case has taught me that there are people inside the system who can't be relied upon. They drove to what turned out to be a small cabin about an hour outside the city, hidden among trees and accessible only by a winding dirt road. Torres had clearly prepared the location for exactly this kind of situation. It had secure communications equipment, enough supplies for several days, and defensive positions that would make it difficult for attackers to approach undetected. "Make yourself comfortable," Torres said, activating various security systems.
"We're going to be here for a while." "How long is a while?"
"Until I can get this evidence to Senator Warren and arrange for protective custody." Sarah looked around the cabin, taking in the communications equipment and maps that covered one wall.
"Torres, what exactly is your background? This isn't standard Naval Criminal Investigative Service stuff." Torres was quiet for a long moment. "Before NCIS, I was Navy Intelligence. Special Operations.
I spent 3 years investigating cases where American military personnel were being killed by their own equipment."
"Cases like this one?" "Exactly like this one. The corruption we're dealing with isn't new, Sarah. It's been going on for years, maybe decades. But it's gotten worse recently, more brazen." "Why?" "Because the people involved have gotten more powerful.
They've placed assets throughout the military and defense establishment. They can cover up failures, eliminate witnesses, and manipulate investigations."
Sarah sat down heavily in one of the cabin's chairs. "How many people have died because of this?" "More than we'll ever know."
"The official records are falsified, and the real numbers are buried in classified files. But conservative estimates suggest hundreds of American soldiers have died due to equipment failures that could have been prevented."
"And nothing has been done?" "People have tried. Investigators, whistleblowers, journalists.
But they tend to have accidents or scandals that destroy their credibility, or sudden transfers to remote locations where they can't continue their work."
"Like what happened to Marcus?" "Marcus was different. He had proof, documented evidence of the falsified test results, recorded conversations with his superiors, financial records showing the money trail. If he had lived to testify, this whole network would have been exposed.
But they killed him first. They killed him first. And then, they came after us because we were getting too close to the truth." Sarah stared at the maps on the wall, seeing pins and photographs that connected a web of corruption spanning multiple states and military installations.
"This is bigger than just one defense contractor, isn't it?" "Much bigger.
We're looking at a conspiracy that involves multiple companies, military procurement officials, and congressional appropriations committees. The amount of money involved runs into the billions.
And they'll kill anyone who threatens it."
"They already have." Torres sat down across from Sarah, her expression serious.
"Sarah, I need you to understand what you've gotten yourself into.
These people have unlimited resources and no moral boundaries. They've already tried to destroy your career, and that was just the beginning."
"What are you saying?"
"I'm saying that after tonight, your old life is over. Even if we successfully expose this conspiracy, even if we get justice for Marcus and all the others, you can never go back to being just a doctor in San Diego."
Sarah felt a deep sadness settling over her.
She thought about her apartment overlooking the bay, her colleagues at the hospital, the life she had built over years of hard work and dedication.
"Do you regret getting involved?" Torres asked gently. Sarah thought about Marcus Webb, about his determination to do the right thing even when it cost him everything.
She thought about the 47 soldiers who had died because someone had prioritized profit over protection. "No," she said finally.
"I don't regret it."
"Good. Because tomorrow we're going to finish what Marcus started."
"How?" Torres pulled out a secure satellite phone. "Tomorrow, we're going to contact Senator Warren and arrange a meeting.
We're going to give her everything, your documentation of Marcus's assault, the evidence from Chen's apartment, my investigation files, all of it."
"And then?"
"And then, we hope that Congress still has enough integrity left to act on what we show them." Sarah looked around the cabin one more time, taking in the reality of her new situation. "Torres,
What happens if Senator Warren can't help us? What happens if the corruption goes so high that even congressional investigation can't stop it? Torres was quiet for a long moment. Then, we find another way. Because the alternative, letting these people continue to profit from the deaths of American soldiers, is unacceptable. They spent the rest of the night organizing their evidence and preparing for what they both knew would be the most important meeting of their lives. But neither of them knew that by morning, the rules of the game would change completely. Neither of them knew that at that very moment, forces within the Pentagon were mobilizing to stop them by any means necessary. And neither of them knew that a Navy helicopter was already being prepped for a mission that would bring the full weight of the U.S. military into their small cabin in the woods. Dr. Sarah Chen woke to the sound of helicopter rotors beating against the morning air. For a moment, disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings of the safe house cabin, she thought she might be dreaming. But the sound grew louder, more insistent, and she realized with growing alarm that the aircraft was getting closer. Lieutenant Commander Jessica Torres was already awake, standing at the window with a pair of binoculars and a weapon that Sarah hadn't seen the night before. "How many?" Sarah asked, her mouth dry with fear. "2 helicopters. Military markings. Coming in fast and low." Torres's voice was calm, but Sarah could see the tension in her shoulders. "This isn't a rescue mission." Sarah joined her at the window and could see the aircraft approaching through the trees. They were dark, predatory-looking machines that moved with lethal purpose. As they got closer, she could make out armed figures in the cabin of the lead helicopter. "What do we do?" Sarah asked. Torres was already moving, grabbing equipment and documents from around the cabin. "We run. These cabins have escape routes for exactly this situation." "Wait." Sarah caught Torres's arm. "What if we're wrong? What if they're here to help?" Torres looked at her with an expression that mixed sympathy with grim reality. "Sarah, legitimate military operations don't happen like this. If this were official rescue, there would have been communication first. Radio contact. Identification protocols. Then, why the first helicopter touched down in the clearing in front of the cabin, its rotors whipping dust and debris into the air. Armed figures in tactical gear began emerging before the aircraft had fully settled. Because they're here to clean up loose ends, Torres finished. Move. Now. Torres led Sarah toward the back of the cabin, where a hidden panel opened to reveal a tunnel that led into the woods. They crawled through the narrow passage as the sound of boots on the cabin's front porch announced that their pursuers had arrived. The tunnel emerged about 50 yards into the forest, camouflaged by fallen logs and brush. Torres had clearly planned this escape route carefully. They could hear voices from the cabin behind them, sharp commands in military terminology. "This way," Torres whispered, leading Sarah deeper into the woods. They had made it about a quarter mile when the second helicopter appeared overhead, its searchlight cutting through the morning shadows. The aircraft hovered above them, the downdraft from its rotors bending trees and making movement difficult. "Dr. Chen. Lieutenant Commander Torres." A voice boomed from the helicopter's loudspeaker. "This is Colonel Andrew Morrison, Pentagon Special Investigations Unit. You need to surrender yourselves immediately for your own protection." Torres grabbed Sarah and pulled her under the cover of a large fallen tree. "Pentagon Special Investigations doesn't exist," she whispered urgently. "It's a cover designation." "Meaning what?" "Meaning those aren't official military personnel. They're contractors. Private operators hired to handle situations the military can't officially acknowledge." The helicopter's searchlight swept over their hiding place, close enough that Sarah could feel the heat from its high-powered beam. Above them, the voice continued its demands. "Dr. Chen, you are in possession of classified materials related to national security. Lieutenant Commander Torres, you are in violation of your oath and operating outside your authority. Surrender now, and you will be treated in accordance with military justice protocols." "Don't listen to them," Torres said. "They're buying time while ground teams move into position." As if to prove her point, Sarah could hear the sound of men moving through the forest,
their communications crackling through radio static. They were being systematically surrounded.
Torres, there's nowhere to run. There's always somewhere to run.
The question is whether we're running toward help or just delaying the inevitable. Torres pulled out her secure satellite phone and began dialing a number.
I'm calling in favors. People I trust within the system. You said the system couldn't be trusted. Not all of it. There are still good people in positions of authority.
People who put their oath above their careers.
The call connected, and Torres spoke rapidly in military terminology that Sarah couldn't follow completely. She caught fragments, references to corruption, evidence, and immediate extraction. Understood, Torres said finally. ETA 20 minutes. We need to hold position until then. Who was that? Admiral Sarah Henderson.
She's been investigating defense contractor corruption from inside the Pentagon.
She's sending legitimate military assets to extract us. How do we know the difference between legitimate military and these people?
Torres showed her a small device that looked like a handheld radio.
Authentication codes.
Real military operations have proper identification protocols. The helicopter above them suddenly veered away, moving toward the cabin.
Through the trees, Sarah could see that it was landing next to the first aircraft.
They're regrouping, Torres observed.
Which gives us some breathing room.
They used the lull to move to a more defensible position among some large rocks that provided better cover. Torres checked her weapon and organized their remaining evidence, making sure the most critical documents were in a waterproof container.
Torres, what happens if your Admiral Henderson can't reach us in time?
Then, we make sure this evidence gets out anyway. Torres showed her a small device attached to the satellite phone.
Dead man's switch.
If I don't enter a code every hour, everything we've collected gets automatically transmitted to 12 different news organizations and congressional offices.
You thought of everything. I learned from other people's mistakes. Too many good investigators have disappeared along with their evidence.
The sound of approaching vehicles made them both tense.
Through the trees, Sarah could see black SUVs moving along the dirt road that led to the cabin. More personnel were arriving, turning their situation from bad to desperate. How long until your help arrives? Sarah asked.
Torres checked her watch.
15 minutes. And how long until those people find us? Based on their search pattern and the number of personnel they're deploying? Maybe 10 minutes. Sarah did the math and didn't like the answer. We're not going to make it, are we?
Torres was quiet for a moment, studying the movement of their pursuers through her binoculars.
Sarah, I need you to know something.
Whatever happens here, you've already done more than anyone could have asked. Marcus Webb would be proud of what you've accomplished.
We haven't accomplished anything yet. Marcus is still dead. The people responsible are still free. That's not true. We've documented the truth. We've proven that Marcus was murdered. We've exposed the corruption. Even if we don't survive this, the evidence will.
Sarah thought about her old life, about the hospital where she had worked, about the patients she had treated and saved. I never imagined my life would end in a forest, running from people who are supposed to protect America.
You're dying to protect America, Torres corrected. There's a difference.
The sound of boots on leaves was getting closer. Sarah could hear radio chatter as the search teams coordinated their approach. It sounded like at least a dozen people, all moving with military precision. That's when they heard it, the distinctive sound of different helicopters approaching from the north. These aircraft had a different engine note, older and more powerful. Torres grabbed her authentication device and began transmitting. After a moment, she smiled, the first genuine smile Sarah had seen from her. Marine One protocols confirmed, Torres said.
Admiral Henderson didn't just send military assets. She sent the president's security detail. The president?
Someone briefed the commander-in-chief on what we found. He's taking a direct interest in this case. The new helicopters appeared over the tree line, 3 aircraft in formation, with marine markings and the kind of heavy armament that made the earlier helicopters look like toys. They moved with absolute authority, their presence immediately changing the dynamics of the situation. The voice that came from the lead aircraft's loudspeaker carried presidential authority.
"This is Colonel Martinez, Presidential Security Detail.
All unauthorized personnel in this area will stand down immediately and identify themselves to Marine security teams.
Dr. Chen and Lieutenant Commander Torres are under direct presidential protection."
Sarah watched in amazement as the black SUVs near the cabin began to retreat, their personnel quickly loading equipment and leaving the area. The private contractors who had been pursuing them through the forest suddenly found themselves outgunned and without legal authority. The lead Marine helicopter landed in a clearing near their position, and legitimate military personnel emerged. Sarah could see the difference immediately in their bearing, their equipment, and their adherence to proper protocols.
"Dr. Chen. Lieutenant Commander Torres." One of the Marines called out. "We're here to escort you to a secure location where you can present your evidence to appropriate authorities."
Torres stood up from their hiding position, her hands visible but still holding her weapon.
"Authentication Lima 77 Charlie," she called back. "Authentication confirmed. You're safe now."
As they walked toward the Marine helicopter, Sarah felt a strange mix of relief and unreality. 3 days ago, she had been a hospital doctor treating an injured patient. Now she was under presidential protection, carrying evidence that could bring down a conspiracy reaching to the highest levels of government and defense contracting. "Where are they taking us?" she asked Torres as they approached the aircraft.
"Washington, D.C. We're going to brief the president personally." The flight to Washington was surreal.
Sarah found herself in a military aircraft flying over the country she had spent her life serving, carrying evidence that American soldiers had been betrayed by the very system meant to protect them. Through the helicopter's windows, she could see the landscape passing below, farms and cities and suburban neighborhoods full of families who had no idea what was happening in their name. The Marine escort treated them with professional respect, but Sarah could sense the gravity of the situation in their serious expressions and careful handling of the evidence Torres carried. "Ma'am," one of the Marines said to Sarah, "you should know that your actions have already had significant impact. Based on preliminary information provided by Admiral Henderson, the President has ordered a complete suspension of all contracts with the companies Lieutenant Commander Torres was investigating."
"What about the people responsible for Marcus Webb's death?" "Multiple arrests are being coordinated as we speak. The FBI has taken over the investigation, with direct presidential authority."
Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced since this whole ordeal began: hope. Not just that justice might be done, but that the system still worked when people were willing to stand up for what was right. The helicopter began its descent toward what Sarah recognized as the White House grounds. Marine One landing protocols were in effect, with security vehicles and personnel positioned around the landing zone. "Dr. Chen," Torres said as they prepared to land, "whatever happens next, I want you to know that you saved lives. The equipment failures that killed those soldiers, that stops now because of what you did."
"We did," Sarah corrected. "Marcus started it. We finished it."
The helicopter touched down with barely a bump. As the rotors wound down, Sarah could see official vehicles waiting to transport them to the meeting that would determine whether Marcus Webb's death had meaning, whether 47 soldiers' sacrifice would be honored, and whether the corruption that had infected America's defense establishment would finally be exposed. As she stepped off the helicopter onto the White House grounds, Dr. Sarah Chen realized that sometimes doing the right thing meant losing everything you thought you wanted, only to discover that what you gained, the knowledge that you had stood up when it mattered most, was worth more than anything you had given up. The president was waiting for them in the Oval Office, along with the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, and Admiral Henderson.
Over the next 4 hours, Sarah and Torres presented their evidence in detail.
They showed the documentation of Marcus Webb's assault, the financial records proving David Chen was a paid asset, and the connection between the defense contractors and the equipment failures that had cost American lives. By the end of the day, 17 people had been arrested on charges ranging from conspiracy to commit murder to treason. Pacific Defense Solutions and 2 other companies had their assets frozen pending investigation. And Congress had announced hearings into defense contractor oversight that would lead to the most significant military procurement reforms in decades.
6 months later, Dr.
Sarah Chen returned to medicine, not in an emergency room, but as head of the new Pentagon Medical Ethics Review Board, tasked with ensuring that military medical standards could never again be compromised by corruption. She never forgot Marcus Webb, the Navy SEAL whose courage in reporting what he saw had cost him his life but ultimately saved countless others. And she never forgot the lesson she learned in those 3 terrifying days, that sometimes the most important decisions aren't the easy ones, but the ones that let you sleep at night knowing you did everything you could to protect the people who deserved protection. The helicopter that landed on the hospital roof that day hadn't just brought rescue, it had brought justice. And sometimes, that's enough to change everything.